Ariel Patricia from Sacred Stories, and I'm delighted to introduce this presentation today. We're having a presentation on the Earth Constitution and the Peace Pentagon with Dr. Glenn Martin and Reverend Laura George.
Right, you guys are doing great. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your gifts and sharing them so generously. It's been an amazing experience. Thank you, Ariel. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Ariel.
absolutely.
All right, bye for now.
So Glenn Martin, Dr. Glenn Martin is going to start his presentation on the Earth Constitution. So Glenn, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Ariel. My presentation is on the Earth Constitution, and because it's Martin Luther King Day, I want to connect that up with the beloved community. Martin Luther King, as you know, had a vision of a beloved community, and it was the human community that he was talking about, not just the community in the United States or any particular region of the world, but a human community. And I want to try to indicate in what ways, the multiple ways that we need to be thinking about a human community and a constitution for the earth. And I'll try. So the world system that we live in today comes from several centuries ago. It was formulated several centuries ago in an entirely different world, of course, when they had no nuclear weapons, they had no or mechanized military, they were riding on horses and so on. It was a 17th century Europe, and scholars say that the key treaty at the end of the 30 Years' War in 17th century Europe was the Treaty of Westphalia. And that's when they defined the modern nation-state system. They said every nation will have a government within certain territorial boundaries, and it will have authority over those boundaries internally, and then every nation will be independent of the other nations. So the boundaries are there between the nations, and they conceived of the world that way. And as we know, it's still this way. Here we are in the 21st century, and even the UN Charter states that every nation is a sovereign state, and UN tries to deal with that situation. So the next slide gives us some of the thinkers who recognized a fundamental problem with this all the way going as soon as it was created in the 17th century. And you can see there, Baruch Spinoza, the famous Dutch philosopher, said that under this system, states will wage war with one another because there is no authority over the states. They have a legal authority, law within the states, but between the states, there is no such thing. Thomas Hobbes, you can see, said very much the same thing, that the states confront one another as gladiators, he said. And in the 18th century, Immanuel Kant, in his famous essay on perpetual peace, said the same thing, that the nations are effectively in a perpetual state of war with one another. There's no law that can assure peace, that can assure equality and the following of proper principles among nations. It's a state of war, he said, even if they're not fighting with one another. And then Hegel said the same thing in the 19th century. He observed that there's no authority above the states. So we have this consistent pattern of thinkers looking at the system of states and saying it's really not credible, it's not reasonable, it's not workable. Benjamin Barber, who's a well-known theorist of democracy in the United States, called this Hobbes's contradiction. Right, as you can see on the slide, the contradiction is that Hobbes argued in his book Leviathan that we need to end war among people, and we do that through the rule of law, Hobbes said. But the contradiction is that between nations, there is no effective rule. Okay, so at the same time that we have this system of nation states called sovereign nation states, who have the right and in fact are almost exclusively militarized, we have the other half of the world system that also developed several centuries ago, 16th and 17th century, and it's known as capitalism. And capitalism brings with it a number of presuppositions which were made by early modern science. And today, contemporary science finds these incorrect. The first thing that capitalism assumes is that human beings are atomistically divided and that we compete with one another out of self-interest for wealth and economic advantage and so on. It assumes economic determinism. It assumes that economics can be a science independent of moral considerations. There are laws of increase in wealth and so on, laws of externalizing profits and the rest of it. And it assumes also something that to me seems quite amazing, quite astonishing, and probably would also to Martin Luther King Jr., and that is the right to unlimited accumulation of wealth. There's no limit. As we know today, people have, Bill Gates and other people, billions of dollars, 65 billion, 70 billion, 80 billion. There's no limit to what they can possess. And the last thing that capitalism assumed that is widely criticized today by environmental economists is that unlimited growth is possible on the planet. That every business tends to grow, the collectivity of businesses tend to grow, the GDP of nations is supposed to grow, and how is this possible on a finite planet? So we've got a world system that is flawed, fundamentally flawed at the core. And there are a number of thinkers, as you may know, called world systems theorists who have developed the philosophy of the world system. They're sociologists. And they have defined the modern world as having these three separate spheres to it. The imperial center in the 16th century, the imperial center was Spain and the Spanish Empire. And nations, mostly European nations, have been rivals for displacing the imperial center, because the imperial center is the center of a vast empire in which colonies or dependent regions or markets, peripheral markets, send their wealth back to the center. So there's an inequitable relationship between the periphery, which is made up of low-tech, poor, militarily weak nations, and the periphery supplies cheap labor and cheap resources that are purchased and accumulated by the center in order to increase the wealth and power of the center. So these two sides, the nation-state system and the capitalist system, are very problematic if we're thinking in terms of how can we make our planet into a beloved community. In terms, in the United States, we've had for a number of years the idea that Black Lives Matter, and we've had the movement called the Black Lives Matter movement. But my question is, and has been right along, don't Black lives count worldwide? Is it just the United States where there's a problem? And as a matter of fact, the global periphery that we just saw in this last slide, the global periphery, Latin America, Africa, South Asia, and so on, by and large, the global South is made up of people of color. peoples of color, and that is systematically exploited, and their poverty is something that they are trapped in. They'll never get out of under the current world system. So if we're thinking, how can we make our planet into a beloved community, we need to be thinking in global systemic terms. And you can see the cover there on this slide of the Constitution for the Federation of Earth. I did not write it. My name is on there as writing the introduction to it. It was written by hundreds of world citizens working together in the late 20th century. But I take it as a model for the systems aspect of the beloved community. A constitution cannot create love, it cannot create belovedness, but it can create the preconditions, the systematic conditions that make the development of love possible. So scholars, again, world system scholars, like the people cited here, Boswell and Chase Dunn and Michael Chossudowski, they in their studies of the world system, they point out that the nation-state system and the system of capital accumulation are integrated with one another. They're inseparable from one another. It isn't that there's two systems, capitalist system and nation-state system, but they've been integrated. And of course, world systems theory talks about exactly that, because there's a core, and that core is a nation, the most powerful militarized nation. And in world systems theory, the most recent global core or center since 1945, since the end of World War II, has been the United States. And that's why, as we all know, the United States has this vast military that more than any other nation in the world, and bases all over the world, because it's an empire. And these bases are not just for security, for protection. They help funnel the wealth of the world back to the global center, to the capital center. And so this slide shows the distribution of wealth in the world, something most of us are probably fairly familiar with. You can see on the left the distribution of wealth in the United States. 50% of the wealth is owned by 90% of the population in the United States. But the blue, which is 40% of the wealth, is owned by only 1%. And then in terms of the world, 1%, the top 1% own 50% of all the wealth in the world. And the majority of the people in the world live in terrible poverty. So it's a system that it has to be supplanted. It needs to be supplanted through the rule of democratic law, right? Asking capitalists to be nice, to be compassionate is not going to do it. If we want to really build a beloved community, we have to integrate law with spiritual growth, with awakening and enlightenment. So the Earth Federation movement, the people who have understood what I've been talking about, go all the way back to World War I. You can see the photo here of Rosika Schwimmer. She was part of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and she and a number of other people in World War I said that they understood something. They understood that World War I was not a struggle of good guys versus bad guys. I mean, that's the way all wars are framed to their populations, right? Oh, they're the enemy, we have to go get them. They understood that World War I was a product of the system of sovereign nations. You've got all these independent nations, no law above them, they're all militarized. It's ripe for war. It's a system that invites war. And Einstein understood the same thing. A number of thinkers, Albert Camus, in his famous essay that he wrote after the Second World War, called Neither Victims Nor Executioners. So Einstein says correctly, in my opinion, the only salvation for civilization and the human race lies in the creation of a world government with the security of nations founded upon law. The only future for civilization when he was alive was he had in mind nuclear weapons, the invention and spread of nuclear weapons. They hadn't yet faced the climate crisis, but now we have not only nuclear weapons, but we have the climate crisis. So, and many thinkers in the area of climate studies say that we may make ourselves extinct unless we can make major transformations on the planet very rapidly. This is why we need world federalism, why we need a planetary constitution. So after World War I, as we know, they created the League of Nations, which failed. After World War II, they created the United Nations. 75 years into the United Nations, it has failed to create peace. It has failed to protect the environment. It has failed to give us universal protection of human rights in the world. It has failed to eliminate poverty and misery on the planet. It cannot do it because it is premised, the United Nations is premised on the system of sovereign nation states. So Article 2 of its charter says the sovereign equality of its members. So they must refrain from threat or use of force, it says, but that's strictly voluntary. So the big ones who have power, like the United States or Russia or China, why should they refrain from the use of force when there's no consequences to their using force, no penalty? The UN cannot. So this is the kind of depiction of the difference between the world that we have, which is on the left, made up of all these sovereign nations, the flags of these nations, almost all of them militarized, ready to go for war in just a moment's notice, and a united planet, the planet that we have seen since the 1960s, photographed from space. There's no up from space, and even from an airplane 5 miles up, you don't see any boundaries. You don't see any militarized boundaries or absolute divisions. It's one planet, one beautiful planet floating in the vastness of space. That's the way we need to be thinking if we want a beloved community on this planet. So in this slide, freedom, justice, peace, sustainability, all of them require democratic world law. Cannot, under the anarchic system of sovereign militarized nations competing with one another economically as well as militarily, we will never be able to achieve that. So in this slide, having to do with sustainability, right? You can see the vast problem, and it's very important to see this because, as we all know, the United Nations has come out in the last 5 years with this new Sustainable Development Goals. And these goals many of these goals are quite beautiful. Eliminate poverty, educate women and girls and make sure they're integrated equally into society, regenerate agricultural land and have sustainable factories and sustainable agriculture and so on. But the fact is, that document, if you study it in detail, assumes, it even states explicitly that the resources of its nation are the sovereign authority are under the sovereign authority of that nation. So think about you can see on the left-hand side of the chart, the planetary atmosphere circulating above each nation. Right? China right now, like the United States, is putting immense amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere from all its factories, its development, and so on. And that atmosphere circulates around the Earth. And yet, under the sovereign nation state system, China has the legal right to do that because that atmosphere is above their territory, right? But it really, that atmosphere should belong to the people of Earth, not to the right of China to do that. And the same thing applies, for example, to Brazil, right? The famous lungs of the Earth. The Amazon basin is in Brazil, producing much of the oxygen that we all need on this planet to breathe. And yet, under the UN system, the Sustainable Development Goals system, Brazil has the legal right to destroy the lungs of the Earth, right? And they're doing it, right? They have they're cutting down, they're developing the Amazon right now as we speak. And there's nothing that anybody can do to prevent it because under the sovereign nation state system, that's their legal right. And the SDG document says this explicitly. So the same with these other items on this chart, whether to cooperate with the rest of humanity in creating a sustainable planet, it's up to each nation. The United States under President Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. It's up to each nation. There's nothing to compel anybody. And under this kind of system, we really don't have a ghost of a chance of creating a sustainable planet. So the Constitution for the Federation of Earth, we saw a photo of the cover of it a few slides ago. It comes from an organization called the World Constitution and Parliament Association that was created by Philip and Margaret Isley beginning in 1958. And for 33 years, they had sufficient funds. He was a businessman. They were from Colorado in the United States, and they use their funds to contact people around the earth and get them involved. A lot of prominent people, things like lawyers, legal scholars, and so on, work together to write this Constitution. And there were 4 constituent assemblies you can see at the bottom left here in 1968, 1977, 1979, 1991. And so they're writing it, they're working on it, they're going over it paragraph by paragraph. And by 1991, they decided that it was finished, that there was even then they understood that the world is in crisis, environmental crisis, possibility of nuclear holocaust. And they said, we need to have this document finished so that it can be available to humanity to create a so the purpose, as defined in the Constitution, of world law is to deal with all those issues that are beyond the scope of nation states. The unworkable treaty system is the United Nations is wedded to. Article 1 gives these 6 functions, right? And notice they're beyond the scope of any nation. First function, prevent war and secure disarmament. That's real, disarmament, right? As long as nations have these militarized systems, you're always going to have the danger of war. But there's no reason why you can't have, if you have the rule of law in the world, you can't have a disarmed planet. Protect human rights worldwide. And again, no nation on earth can do this because under the UN system, every nation is responsible for protecting human rights, even within its own territory and nowhere else. So if the Rohingya people are being persecuted in Burma, no one can do anything about it under this system. Create the conditions for universal prosperity. Again, No one can do that unless you have a world authority that is looking at the North-South relationship. Regulate and protect world resources that belong to all of us, like the atmosphere of the earth and the hydrosphere of the earth and so on. The oceans belong to all of us. They don't belong to sovereign nations. Protect the environment and the ecological fabric of life. And the Constitution is full of articles and ways of doing this. It's a compendium of directed towards sustainability. And then number 6, devise solutions for all problems that are beyond the scope of governments and plan for the future. So the structure, the basic structure of the Earth Federation government under the Constitution looks like this. All right, it's a parliamentary system, which means that the world parliament is the ultimate authority. And it has 3 houses. You can see a House of Peoples, a House of Councilors, and a House of Nations. In the House of Peoples, which will have 1,000 delegates from all over the world, will have the largest voting block, larger than the House of Councilors and the House of Nations, which means that this is a grassroots. It's not a top-down, it's grassroots, right? What this Constitution does is create 1,000 electoral districts around the world, and the grassroots of the world send representatives to the World Parliament. And each nation, it does not abolish the nations, but each nation is now like states within the United States or states within cantons within China. Each nation is still there, but it's now part of the federation. And so the nations send 1, 2, or 3 delegates to the parliament, depending on their population, their size. And then the House of Councilors, this unique feature of the Earth Constitution, which arranges it so you get wise people, you get highly educated people, you get thoughtful people into the government. And under the Constitution, the councilors have a very special role that I won't go into because we don't have time, but they have a special role. I think it's brilliantly designed, the way it works. And so the basic organs of the Earth Federation, the World Judiciary, you can see at the bottom of the chart, the World Executive, the World Police, and the World Ombudsman, all function under the World Parliament. They're all have clearly defined functions. Naturally, a World Judiciary is necessary because it's a judiciary that keeps the peace. If there is conflict, and there will always be conflict, conflict needs to be resolved justly and fairly through mediation, through dialogue, and ultimately, if necessary, through judicial decision making. The World Executive, notice that it has a 5-person presidium, one person from each continental division. There'll be no single president of the World Federation. Everything is divided into consortiums. The same with the World Police and the World Attorneys General that will be together in that 3rd organ of the Earth Federation. It's a consortium of 5, one from each continental division. And then it's the same with the World Ombudsman. Again, it's run by a panel of 5. And this is another unique function here in the Earth Constitution, because the Ombudsman's job is to be a watchdog on the government, the Earth Federation government itself. Its job is to make sure the World Police are not disabusing their power, to make sure the World Executive is doing its job properly and transparently, and so on. So it's built this kind of check and balance is built right into the system. The other main function of the World Ombudsman is to push for universal human rights, to make sure human rights are protected everywhere on Earth. So that's the basic structure. I won't go into it further because we want plenty of time for Laura to finish her part of the discussion and so on. But if there are questions, if anybody wants to look at our website and contact us, it would be excellent. We'd happy to respond. And you can see on this next slide, our website is www.earthconstitution.world. And we're not just talking about and hoping that people will ratify the Earth Constitution, because there's another unique feature to the Constitution. That is Article 19. It gives the people of Earth the authority to start things now. The Constitution was written with an awareness of crisis. Right? In 1991, even then, the environmental crisis, the population explosion, the nuclear weapons, ever more advanced, ever more dangerous, they knew that it had to be started as soon as possible. So under Article 19, we can define the electoral districts, we the people of Earth. We can begin election process, and that's what this Orbis project is about. We will be doing an election process and electing representatives virtually online with secure voting. And you can see there, the 15th session of the Provisional World Parliament is scheduled for New Delhi in India in next December. And if the COVID pandemic has not subsided by then, it can be easily postponed, but it will be in New Delhi. It's a key place for it. And so this is another aspect of our work under Article 19, that we are allowed to create provisional world government. And so the main thing that we've done in this regard is create the Provisional World Parliament. And as you can see, it's held 14 sessions to date. The first session was in 1982 in Brighton, England. And so we're actually working to create the infrastructure that's necessary for the Earth to become a beloved, law-abiding, democratic community. So the Earth Constitution establishes a peace system, right? Peace, a beloved community is a peaceful community, but it's also a community which has a system, right? We know from the Black Lives Matter protests that the policing system and the so-called justice system in the United States are racist and skewed. They're not equitable. They're not fair. They're not loving. They need to be changed. But it's not just in the United States. The entire world system needs to be changed. So the Constitution, you can see here, it demilitarizes the nations. It establishes real unity and diversity. All people are now world citizens, members of the Earth with the rights, all the rights and responsibilities of world citizens. It holds individuals accountable to the law, not whole nations. It doesn't go around bombing enemy groups or nations, because it's individuals who are responsible to the law. It mandates protection of all the world resources, and therefore is the foundation for a sustainable civilization on our planet. Protects human rights and due process of law worldwide, and it establishes conflict resolution, education, mutual understanding programs worldwide. It says this explicitly. It just doesn't create enforceable law, although this is essential. The Constitution says that people need to begin dialoguing. They need to begin reconciling. They need to have reconciliation committees and so on. And the Provisional World Parliament, in its past work, has elaborated on those things. So I just want to leave you with that thought then, before we turn it over to Laura as part of our presentation, that there's a connection, I think a fundamental connection between Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of a beloved community, which needs to be a global community, a human community, and the need for democratic world law. The two are inseparable. Okay, thank you, everybody. Laura?
Glenn has set me up perfectly for the next part of this talk, because when I first learned of the Earth Constitution, I think the piece that drew me in the quickest was the fact that this would be the only way to establish world peace. And here at the Oracle Institute, we are building the Peace Pentagon. Very happy when I met Glenn over a decade ago, and we became fast friends in our desire to assist the planet in moving into a new paradigm, a paradigm of peace, sustainability, and worldwide human rights. And so over the years, we've gotten to know each other better. Again, my name is Laura George. I'm the executive director of the Oracle Institute. And we are a spiritual think tank, if I were going to summarize our work. We study the nexus between religion, politics, human rights, and conscious evolution. Our campus is home of the Peace Pentagon, and we built it to be a conference and training center for progressive and pluralistic programs. And we also operate an online platform associated under the same branding for sacred activism. Most recently, the Peace Pentagon has been designated the US headquarters for the Earth Constitution Institute, and also for the World Constitution and Parliament Association. So that's bringing Glenn and my work even closer. So why did we decide to build a Peace Pentagon? People ask me that sometimes. There are all the obvious reasons. I think we needed to sort of energetically counterbalance that war Pentagon in Northern Virginia. So we're down here in Southern Virginia, and that is the purpose of this building. In addition to being a conference and training center, there's a mystical component to this building. And I wanted to hit that because I felt this was the appropriate audience to speak about this, this aspect of the building. So for those of you who are listening who are into esoteric studies and mysticism, you may already know that the Hopi believe that we're entering the fifth world. Madame Blavatsky and Edgar Cayce said that mankind was entering the next phase of its development, which they described as the fifth root race. And one of my favorite mystics is Walter Russell, and he called this time the fifth kingdom of man. So ECI has integrated, I'm not sure if they knew it or not, the power of 5 throughout the Constitution, which was another thing that drew me to it. There are 5 continental divisions, there are 5 world capitals. Glenn mentioned that there's a 5-person presidium, and most of the terms under the Earth Constitution are 5 years in length. So these are just some of the more esoteric aspects of why these were signs for me that this was something I really wanted to get involved with. And I'm now on the ECI board, and I help Glenn as much as I can to promote the Earth Constitution because I firmly believe in it. But to make it a reality, we're going to have to get beyond this postmodern lens that we find ourselves in. Today, there's this milieu of anything goes relativism, and to get into the next paradigm, it's going to be difficult because now we're dealing not only with that sort of an atmosphere, it's gotten even worse. We've got fake news, Russian bots, populism, conspiracy theories, and add a dash of nihilism in there. And we're all aware that the climate right now is fraught with anxiety and danger even. At Oracle, we reject relativism, and we do seek objective truth. And our formal mission statement is Thomas Jefferson's Act for Religious Freedom, in which he personifies truth. And he says, "Truth is great and will prevail if left to herself as a proper and sufficient antagonist to error, and has nothing to fear from conflict unless, by human interposition, truth is disarmed of her natural weapon, errors ceasing to be dangerous of our collective evolutionary journey. And I love this painting that I put beside our mission statement. It's called Saving Truth from Falsehood and Envy. So let's talk just a bit about why objective truth as the appropriate standard is something that we need to seek in order to not only promote the Earth Constitution, but also to promote the values that we all care about. Relative truth is this idea that truth changes based on different circumstances or perception, that there is no universal truth, and that every point of view is both credible and has merit. Absolute truth, on the other hand, is the idea that truth is objectively discernible. We can test it, we can rely on it in all instances once we discover it. And I include moral absolutism in here as well, that truth can be validated on a moral basis, also regardless of circumstances, cultural beliefs, and so on. And one of my heroes, Mahatma Gandhi, said that there is no God higher than truth. To figure out why people behave the way they behave, we like to study the spectrum of consciousness at the Oracle campus. And this model helps us understand why people's worldviews are different, how they not just view truth, but also other issues. So I'm going to talk about this just for a minute. So in thinking about how to apply this research to the Earth Constitution Institute's work and promoting the Earth Constitution itself and getting it ratified, we have to think about who our target audience is and how the world is populated by people in very different memes. We're going to use the term meme, mindsets, worldviews. We use this research at Oracle to help us in all ways, to help us decide what we're going to focus on in upcoming curriculum decision, to set goals, to evaluate ourselves, our students, our peers. And we don't have time to go in the model today, but I just wanted to mention that in my mind anyway, there are a few things that every human wants. Obviously, everybody wants freedom. We also want justice. And now, knowing how damaged our planet is, I would say that everybody on the planet wants planetary sustainability. So, as I said, we don't have time to go into this in detail, but for those of you who are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this pyramid picture of spiral dynamics, integral theory, spectrum of consciousness, very, very condensed, will help us see that the realm of the new human, that part that's in green and up, those are people who are going to get the Earth Constitution in 5 seconds. These are people who have already gone world-centric. They already care about people in other countries. That starving child in Africa feels like my starving child. These are people who have learned that it's fine to pay higher taxes so we can all have health care. So that worldview is absolutely going to understand the work of Glenn Martin and of the Earth Constitution Institute. This research, though, breaks the consciousness levels up so that we can understand how others who may not have reached a pluralistic mindset yet would also be supportive of federating the planet for reasons that pertain to how they view the world. So in the first tier, similar to Maslow's model, and he called these first tier stages, or he likened them to deficiency needs, sufficiency needs. These were things that if you don't have, you simply cannot think about expanding your definition of family, your definition of you know, who's in your we group. So in the first tier, these worldviews tend to reject the views of others. And this is where we see societal conflict most often, culture wars most often, because each one of these memes have a slightly different set of values. And just in general, most of us start at an egocentric mindset. We then go into an ethnocentric mindset, and then into a rational worldview. Stage 3 is oftentimes called the Machiavellian meme, because it's based on the principle might makes right, if I were going to sum it up. These are people who operate at a level that are predominantly ego-based, and most of us pass through this stage of development by the time we hit puberty. Most of us will get punished by our parents if we bully too long, or if we act out too long and expressing ourselves to the detriment of others. And until recently, this meme was not acting out in the United States. But as we've seen since the January 6th riot on the Capitol, Donald Trump has made it okay for this, this worldview to express itself. And they tend to do that in a violent way. The next stage is stage 4, and that's an ethnocentric meme. It's a we meme. It's often maligned as the herd meme, but this is the stage where fundamentalist thinking kicks in, and I don't mean by that just religion. It also pertains to the military mindset, the militation. So these people really value structure, and they do follow rules. They do honor law. And I think that this meme would very much be interested in learning more about the Earth Constitution. After all, this meme can be personified most easily by thinking of the Great Generation that fought World War II. They would understand that at this juncture in human history, we all need to band together again. The next stage is level 5, and that's an I stage again. It's very individualistic. It's known as the rational meme. And here again, we're going to find humans who logically can understand the merit of the Earth Constitution, people who are going to see that it has benefits, not just for them, but for others. And I think that we can bring these folks along too, with the appropriate level of promotion of these concepts and getting the Earth Constitution out there in a more public way. And then, as I said, when I started, at stage 6 and up, that. And the more people that we can inform of the Earth Federation movement and the Earth Constitution specifically, the better. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we do at the Peace Pentagon. One of the things that we do here, which actually Glenn is assisted with, and many other organizations as well, because it's turned into truly a group effort, are the Building the New World conferences. And this last one, we just had it in the fall. And we are using Barbara Marx Hubbard's Wheel of Co-Creation, slightly modified, but that is the icon that we use for these conferences because it sets forth all the sectors of society. So we now call it the sector of society model. And at these conferences, we have futurists and thought leaders in each one of these sectors come and speak. And as I said, we just finished the 2020 BTNW conference, and it was a smashing success. We filmed all of it. It was archived to see the presentation. World. Other things we do at the Peace Pentagon involve these orgs. I threw a bunch of logos on the screen this morning just to give you an idea of the extent to which we have been working with other groups. inviting speakers to come from these groups. We did a class a couple years ago with Glenn and the head of World Beyond War, David Swanson. It was called Beyond Nationalism. We did a retreat recently, or last year, with one of our authors, Valerie Tirico, and that was entitled Truth in a Post-Truth World. So we're hitting very meaty topics. And in addition, I kind of put this, I also love to focus on spiritual growth and spiritual evolution. So at the Peace Pentagon, you're going to get a taste of all sorts of programming. And I wanted to mention just a couple projects that I'm very passionate about. I've gotten involved with the Peace Alliance. I lobbied with them last year for the Department of Peace. The Department of Peace has a long and storied history, and it would fold beautifully into the whole Earth Constitution matrix that Glenn showed you in that slide. It's been pending for years. The idea was first brought up, I think, back in the 1940s when the Earth Federation movement really kicked into gear. And right now it's House Bill 1111. So I love that. House Bill 1111 for the Department of Peace. There's another bill pending that I also find very interesting and that we support the Peace Pentagon, and that is House Bill 1469. And that's called the Religious Freedom Peace Tax Fund Act. And if you don't know this, there are millions of Americans not paying taxes as conscientious objectors, just like we've got the ability to conscientiously object to war and not go fight in the military, which, by the way, is something that Glenn Martin did as a young man. There are people who just have stopped paying taxes, or that portion of their taxes that go to war. The Quakers, by the way, and the Mennonites do this routinely. The government leaves them alone. But now regular Americans like us are doing it. And this bill, HR 1469, would make it legal to do that. Right now it's not, and people are bravely doing it anyway. But these are just some of the ideas on the horizon from those who believe in Earth Federation. The other thing we do here at the Oracle Institute is we publish award-winning books. And these are some of our titles. You see in the middle and the bottom row are the Oracle Foundational Trilogy, and sort of set forth our ethos and our purpose here at Oracle Campus. You can see I've got the Earth Constitution up here, which you can purchase on Amazon. We also can send it to you from our institute or ECI. And Glenn has a new book coming out. This may not be the cover. This was just a mock-up I did for this presentation, but Glenn has a new book coming out that is just fabulous. And it will be out by summer, and I think it's going to be our 7th book award. And here are just some pictures, some stills from our campus. This labyrinth in the top left, we call the Turtle Island Labyrinth. Everything that we've built outdoors is to honor the indigenous peoples who lived here along the New River, where we're located. There's a picture of the New River on the right. It is absolutely breathtaking here. We're in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, along this river, which was completely misnamed because it's the oldest river in the United States. It's the oldest river in the Western Hemisphere. And some geologists think it's the oldest river in the world because the Appalachian Mountains are the oldest. This center picture is when the Kogi people from Colombia came. We had just a beautiful reception. You can see the inside of the Peace Pentagon isn't quite finished yet. The picture underneath is also from an interfaith gathering that we did, and there's Glenn. And we've got the Peace Pole Medicine Wheel outside of the Pentagon. We do a lot of events there. And then when the Kogi came, we built this kiva. We called it the Kogi Kiva. And it was, there's Glenn again. And this is a justice from South America who was visiting. Our Kogi Kiva was christened by a volcano keeper from Mexico, the Otomi Toltec people. And so we've got when COVID's not around, a really both exciting and also educational and also inspirational campus life here. And we hope you'll visit. And just to summarize, we got a lot going on here. In addition to being the headquarters for the Earth Constitution Institute and the work that we're doing with the Constitution itself, we've got you know, a teaching campus, we've got the online platform, we have a spirituality school, we've got the publishing house. We also have an esoteric multi-faith church called Oracle Temple. And for those of you who are looking for community, we have now launched an intentional community here called the Valley of Light. And we're looking for second tier humans, those who are in that, on that little mountain picture, greening up. We're looking for our kindred souls, people who are ready, willing, and able to devote themselves to building a better world. And if you're out there, come visit us. And it's my great honor to assist Glenn in his life's work. Thank you.
Questions?
I think we're 1 minute over, but if they can make it happen, I am here to help.
Chime in. This is Ariel, and say thank you, Glenn and Laura. Thank you so much for sharing all that. It was such an education for me as well, and we work together to see the breadth and the scope of the work that you're doing. So thank you both for sharing today. And I have a question. Well, one, I'd like you both to share, even if it's in the chat and verbally again, how people can get in touch. And I made a note about the HR 1469. So Laura, how would you suggest when people, something like this particular bill or others that people might want to get behind, what do you feel has been the most effective way for people to participate and have their views heard?
So let me talk about the first bill first. HR 1111, John Lewis, you know, who passed, was behind that. And it's become a pet project of the Peace Alliance, which was co-founded by Marianne Williamson. So Marianne Williamson's big time into the Department of Peace effort. And Peace Alliance, they go every year, they lobby, they have a whole subset of their staff and their volunteers dedicated to getting the Department of Peace manifested in 3D. I think it's just a beautiful and natural alliance for them to meet Glenn, learn more about the Earth Constitution. I mean, I told them about it when I was with them. And we just had to make sure we're not working in those silos. You know, we have our pet projects and then we forget, there's others who can help us. So that's HR 1111. And then the other one, I just kind of stumbled on that on my own. I did some research. I was fascinated by the peace taxpayer movement, which is growing. And that I tried to convince Peace Alliance to take on as well. I'm not sure if they have or not, but I would love to help spearhead that one. And that's for people, and what the bill would allow you to do is take that percentage of your taxes that would go to war, and it's something crazy like 30 or 40% now. I can't remember what it is, it's high. And you could say, give that percentage of my taxes that I'm sending in to Department of Education or Health and Human Services. So you can't refuse to pay it, but now you can say, I'm a conscientious objector to war. I want my money applied to something that helps humanity.
I think just for discussion, I think that that's fascinating. I think that's so needed even for citizens to be able to redirect their funds to what really matters to them and not have it come through political representatives and the current system. And I just want to I'm going to open it up for other questions, but I just want to say it's kind of mind-boggling that in 2021 and that we're having a conversation trying to have a Department of Peace. On one hand, I think that that's, thank God, it's, you know, and on the other hand, I think how crazy that just isn't something we have, that just isn't how we live and show up, that there is a Department of Peace for our nation and around the world. So again, I just want to say thank you for, you know, even just bringing that energy and sharing it and how you are is part of the manifestation of that. I truly believe in. So.
Thanks.
But I want to know, what made you people choose New Delhi? Was there a reason why New Delhi was where this event is to be held?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a long story, and I won't go into the whole story. But we've held sessions of the Parliament around the world. As I mentioned, we started out in the Royal Pavilion in Brighton, England, 1982. In 1985, the second session of the Parliament was in New Delhi. That's the only other session in New Delhi, and it was opened by the then President of India, Zail Singh. And it was presided over, after he opened it, the actual work on the laws was provided over by the Balram Jakar, who was the Speaker of the Lok Sabha at that time. So New Delhi is, for one thing, it has embassies and consulates of nations all over the world, and we want to invite them. We want to get the nations interested in the Constitution. But there's another thing too. There are forces in the world that do not want us to succeed. And if you use your imagination, you can understand which national forces those might be. So we have experienced repression of interference with our ability to hold these sessions. And in our view, India, being a very large nation and not being part of the East-West polarization, the Cold War and so on, is much more hospitable to our meeting without interference. We've already sent letters to Prime Minister Modi and the Indian government. And they may affirm us, or they may just tolerate us, but nevertheless, we have a lot of members in India, a lot of support there, and it's going to go forward there. So we can be fairly certain that there'll be a very successful parliament, whereas other places in the world is much more contingent.
Just one more question for me, just I know we're wrapping things up, but Glenn, you mentioned it in your presentation, but if you can also maybe just articulate again, what would be the best thing that people can do in order to support the Earth Constitution? Because part of it is getting the word out, like we are today, and we'll do going forward. But what are some other things that people can do to show their support for one united Earth?
You know, the website earthconstitution.world has a space where you can sign up to become a member. Right, and it also has another space where you can sign the Earth Constitution, and we encourage that because since it was finished in 1991, there have been many thousands of people from around the world have signed it, and so it's a kind of gathering momentum. But people who join as members of the WCPA, the World Constitution and Parliament Association, many of them around the world organize chapters so that they have local people. We have a very active chapter in Venezuela, for example, one in Peru, and so on. And of course, we also need financial support. You know, we've got these huge projects and these huge visions, and there's a way to do that, of course, also on the website. But if people have skills, whether there be computer skills or people skills or communication skills, they can work with us. I mean, be in contact with us about how they can specifically maximize their effectiveness in transforming the world and creating a truly beloved human community with the Constitution as the framework, the Earth Constitution. And as I said earlier, also we're in the process of defining 1,000 electoral districts for the world, and we'll soon be developing blockchain secure digital voting. And so we would want people who are interested in becoming voters, being registered voters and organizing electoral commissions within their districts and moving forward with actually organizing the world for voting. The first goal will be a virtual world parliament that we will be creating. So there's lots of things that whatever people's talent is, we welcome it, on behalf of the future of humanity. One of the things that I thought of when we were talking about the Department of Peace, which I think is a wonderful idea and I very much support it, but the US already has a Peace Institute, right? It doesn't have a full department, but it has a Peace Institute. And for years, I was chair of the Peace Studies program at my university, Radford University. And on occasion, we would invite representatives from the US Department of Peace to come and give talks and engage in dialogue with us and so on. But maybe it's changed today because I'm no longer chair of that program, but in our experience, they didn't, they were interested in peace, but they were interested in peace from a national point of view. And one of the things that I think is necessary is that we all become world citizens and develop a global consciousness, and peace, to think of peace in terms of how can my nation be more peaceful with other nations without changing that structure of militarism and so on, is not what we ultimately need, right? We really need demilitarizing the nations of the world and making them administrative units within a federation, a real federation, with democratic world law. So it's just a thought I wanted to throw out, that a Department of Peace, as important as it will be, has to be a stepping stone to world peace, to a world transformation.
Yes. Do any of your programs include the animals? Because I believe that peace is only possible when we really have peace in all species, when we stop contributing to violence that is done to the animals. So I was wondering if that is part of what you're doing.
Well, the Constitution itself is about all of the biosphere, all of nature. It doesn't have items on animal rights. It's about creating, respecting human dignity and equality of all of us. But in my new book that Laura mentioned, that's coming out this year, we understand very clearly that it has to include the animals, that we have to be thinking not as dominators of the planet who use the animals for food and everything, for our own uses, but as how can we restore harmony with the biosphere and the ecosystem. We have to begin living within Gaia, the Gaia wholeness of the planet, and no longer exploiting with an orientation of exploitation and domination. So very much so, even though it's not, I think it's implicit rather than explicit in the Constitution, because we need transformation not only of these systems that I was talking about, the capitalist system, which exploits the animals without qualms, and the nation state system, which doesn't care one way or the other about the animal. But if we have a new world system, it will be the grounds for a new spiritual orientation too, a new way of thinking, which will very much include the animals.
One question I had was how you're defining continents, because you could argue that Australia is not really a continent if Greenland's not. Maybe it's a large island. Asia and Europe aren't separate. What do you do with Central America? So what I was wondering is if you've given any thought to the populated tectonic plates, that might be a better division relative to where population is on the geological plates. That would actually give a lot of integrity to the Indian subcontinent and to other places that otherwise get put into a general definition of Asia or something else. So how are you defining continents?
Well, that's a good question, Kurt. How I might want to define continents is not what's at issue here, because the Earth Constitution itself, right, that defines it, and it may be that it could have done a better job, but the administration of the world is based on those 1,000 electoral districts that I mentioned, and then the districts will be clumped into 20 regional districts and 10 magna regional districts, contiguous, in contiguous form. So when it speaks of the 5 continental divisions and requiring a member in these agencies from one member from each of the 5 continents, it has in mind Asia, Europe, Africa, Latin, North America, and South America. But these will be defined in terms of the groupings of these world administrative districts. All right, and that's up to the World Parliament to make the final determinations on that. What our job is to get this ratified and get them in the business of then sorting out these details, which they could do very rapidly once it's ratified. So anyway, I agree that it could what we have is a template, as I said, finished in 1991, and I, like any other person, might want to make changes. I'd say, oh, this could be worded better or whatever, but our situation on this planet is one where we really don't have time to argue over how we might want to word. If we open this up to people, saying, how would I edit this or that? As we all know, it would just go on and on and on. The big corporations would be there wanting something to protect themselves, and the nations would be in there. So we have a template now that's very good. It's brilliant, and and it may have some flaws, but the most effective and the most transformative attitude, I think, is to say, let's use this template, and then if changes need to be made after it has been ratified, there's plenty of space within the Constitution to make those changes.
Yeah, another quick question I had too is this question of how one gets there. I mean, there's no doubt, as Rhiannon and David and others said at your conference, and every other great leader is saying, we're moving now toward creating a global worldview. And of course, what your scheme does is jumps it completely up to the integral level where you would actually have that. The question of how you get there in the context of all the problems you talked about getting there, that would go back to the 2 options of either incrementally by people waking up or by some catastrophe that gives us no other alternative. What's interesting, both in this present scheme and in your scheme, much depends on good behavior. Even in your scheme, you could have one branch attack another, just as our executive just attacked our legislative branch, if people were not on good behavior. So is the hope that there's some type of confluence between the developmental, developing the highest levels of behavior on a global level that would demand this type of a system, even though it would seem impossible? Or, how do you think we get there? And then the last thing I'll say is, that's the question everybody wants to ask an advanced ET. How did you get there? How did you get by these thresholds?
Yeah, that's absolutely a fundamental question, and it's, people are asking it all the time, and you put your finger right on the fundamental nature of it. We do our best within the resources available to us We have initiatives, various range of initiatives that we're working on. But ultimately, it requires the faith, if you will, or the belief that there's an ongoing spiritual transformation that is leading to better and better. You know, we have a lot of very good people who affirm this, but we also we have, for example, in the next session of the Provisional World Parliament, a High Court justice in Peru is introducing legislation that will require spiritual training for anybody who is elected to the World Parliament. Right, so we're trying. That's one of the things we're integrating various strands of possibilities, various strands of potential, and no one knows the future, and no one knows the magic bullet to create the future. So you know, some of it is faith, hope, vision, whatever. But you know, all we can do is, to the best of our understanding and the best of our judgment, try to do what is most effective, right? What most reaches people and so on.
Kurt, thank you so much for asking those questions. I just want to say thank you to everyone on Facebook Live for joining us, and I'm going to stop that stream. And just thank you both so much. And also Glenn and Laura, thank you. Ariel, thank you for coordinating. And Malini, thank you so much for hosting. What a beautiful time together. And we couldn't do it without all the participants. So.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you.
Yes, and
Thank
if
you
any